The power to transform your world. Everything you need is already waiting to be discovered. This text, almost a life journal, has helped people who found it by accident, as it was hidden in the depths of the internet. Although it resonates with the ideals of several authors, this book finds its essence in a deep connection with teachings of personal transformation and expansive consciousness, such as those proposed by Joe Dispenza, Eckhart Tolle, and Louise Hay, among others. Here, concepts like the power of intention and the conscious creation of your reality guide you toward an authentic evolution. Each chapter invites you to recognize that real change begins within you, reflecting how to live a life aligned with your true self. This book is a guide for those who, upon finding it, have transformed their lives, demonstrating that personal evolution can become a legacy of inspiration for others. The Magic of Changing Your Mind, author. Unknown. The Awakening of the Self, breaking. Internal barriers. I remember the exact moment I realized that the biggest obstacle in my life was myself. It wasn't a single day or a particular situation. It was an accumulation of moments that, one after another, pushed me to confront myself. Have you ever wondered if the limitations you feel come from the outside, or if they are actually echoes of your own thoughts? I did, and I was scared to discover the answer. Life seemed like a labyrinth of decisions, responsibilities, and expectations, and yet all that noise was just the surface of something deeper. Who was I really underneath all those layers? That's the question we unknowingly always avoid. We get distracted. We fill the day with tasks, but we rarely stop to listen to what is happening within ourselves. That afternoon, as I was walking down a lonely street, I realized that I had been living on autopilot for years. My steps followed a familiar routine, but my mind, my heart, were trapped in the past. Have you ever felt that way, as if your body were present but your soul were anchored in memories, in wounds that you haven't been able to heal? What we don't understand is that those wounds, those fears, are the barriers that prevent us from waking up to who we really are. We convince ourselves that we are not capable, that we don't deserve more, that life is just like this, and that we must conform. But who dictates those rules? When I asked myself that question for the first time, I realized that the answer was clear. Me. Internal barriers are not immovable monuments. They are mental constructions. We build them to protect ourselves, but over time, they become prisons. And the curious thing is that the keys have always been in our hands. So why is it so hard for us to free ourselves? Maybe because we fear what we will find on the other side. We fear our own power, our own potential. I remember a day when, sitting at my desk, I felt paralyzed. I had everything I had ever wanted, but the feeling of emptiness was still there. It was at that moment that I asked myself, what would you do if you weren't afraid? What version of yourself would emerge if you dared to let go of everything? You think you are? It was a difficult question, but a necessary one, because in the answer, I found the truth of my being. The process of breaking those barriers is not simple, but it is not impossible either. It all begins with the act of observing yourself, of being aware of your thoughts and emotions. How many times a day do you talk to yourself harshly? How many times do you stop yourself from the possibility of something great because you believe you are not enough? Those are the barriers, and they are there not to stop us, but to show us how far we are willing to go. What I learned on my journey was that true awakening doesn't come from a moment of divine enlightenment. It's not something that happens overnight. Awakening is a series of small moments in which you choose not to believe the story you have told yourself for years. It is the instant in which you decide that your past does not define your future. How can you begin to tear down those barriers? With small actions. Every time you face a situation that makes you doubt yourself, ask yourself, Is this doubt real, or is it a shadow of my fear? And then take the next step, even if it's small, because every step you take forward is another crack in the walls that have kept you imprisoned. It is a path of self-knowledge, of transformation, and each of us has our own rhythm. But if there's one thing I can tell you, it's that when you dare to break those internal barriers, something wonderful happens. You reconnect with yourself, and in that reunion, you discover that you have always been enough, that you have always had the power to create the life you desire. Are you willing to take that step? Do you dare to awaken to your true self and break the barriers that have kept you in the shadows? The decision is yours, and the time is now. The hidden force of thought: how to create your reality. It wasn't until I realized that every thought is a seed that I began to see how, little by little, the circumstances of my life took shape according to what I carried in my mind. It was a revealing moment. Have you ever felt that the external world simply reflects what you feel inside? It's no coincidence. What you think, what you believe, determines your reality in a deeper way than we usually imagine. I remember a day when, overwhelmed by uncertainty, I couldn't move forward. I felt trapped in my own fears, in my doubts, and every thought that passed through my mind made me retreat, filling the path with imaginary obstacles. Has that happened to you? On that day, I understood that the real blockage was not in what was happening outside, but in what was happening inside of me. How can we change what surrounds us without first changing what we carry within? That is the question that transformed my way of seeing life. The thoughts we harbor are powerful, both for creating and for destroying. What I thought were simply fleeting ideas were actually the invisible architects of my future. What we don't understand is that our beliefs, those we repeat without questioning them, are what build or limit the possibilities that await us. That afternoon, as I watched the horizon from a hill, I realized that I had been carrying thoughts that did not serve me for years, thoughts of doubt, of inadequacy, of fear of failure. How many times have you felt that your own thoughts are the ones that sabotage you? But the curious thing is that those ideas had no more power than the one I gave them. They had grown within me because I had fed them. And so I was faced with the reality that my life was nothing more than the reflection of my mind. Is it possible to create a different reality? Of course it is. But first, you must honestly observe what kind of thoughts you carry with you every day. Each one of them is a stone on the path of building your future. Are you building walls or opening doors? On that day, I decided that I no longer wanted to be a prisoner of my mind. It was not an easy decision, because it meant confronting myself, my deepest beliefs, everything I had taken for granted. But I knew that if I did not change the way I thought, my reality would remain the same. And it was then that I began to work on changing my thoughts. How can we change our thoughts? It's simpler than it seems, but it requires dedication. Every time you catch yourself thinking about something that limits your potential, ask yourself, is this thought an absolute truth or just a story I'm telling myself? Because at the end of the day, our thoughts are just that. Stories, and you can decide which ones to continue telling and which ones to leave behind. I remember how I began to question my own narratives. The things I believed were impossible began to seem more achievable when I changed my way of thinking. What I once saw as insurmountable barriers became challenges that I could face. How can a simple thought have so much power? Because thoughts are not mere ideas. They are the energy that moves the universe in your life. What you think, you attract. What you believe, you create. As I changed my thoughts, my reality also began to change. Have you noticed that when you change the way you see things, the things you see change too? It's as if the world responds to the energy you emit. When I started to think with more clarity, with more positivity, I began to attract situations and people who resonated with that new energy. It wasn't magic. It was the result of aligning my mind with what I wanted to see in my life. What thoughts are you carrying today that are creating your reality? If you feel that you are not where you would like to be, start by asking yourself if your thoughts are in tune with the future you desire. Every thought you choose is a brick in the construction of your future. Every day you have the opportunity to choose whether those bricks are going to build a prison or a fortress. What do you choose today? It is a process of self-awareness, of learning to be the architect of your own life. And the most beautiful thing of all is that the power to create is in you. Beyond the environment. The power of the mind. Over the world, I've noticed something curious in life. Many times we believe that circumstances dictate our destiny. How many times have you felt that your environment defines what you can or cannot do? It happened to me too. For a long time, I thought I was a prisoner of the conditions that surrounded me, that everything that didn't work was the fault of the external world. But what if I told you that all of that is just a perception? There was one particular day that changed my way of seeing the world. I was trapped in a routine that suffocated me. Everything around me seemed gray, as if the environment were dictating a limited life to me. Has that ever happened to you? Do you feel trapped in a job, a relationship, or even a place, and you start to believe that everything around you is an insurmountable barrier? That's how I felt. But then a question shook me. What if the power is not in the environment, but in how we interpret it? That day, I began to question everything I had previously taken for granted. I started to observe that what I thought was limiting me actually had no control over me unless I gave it to it. Have you ever wondered how many of the barriers you perceive are self-imposed? I discovered that much of the power we give to the external world is nothing more than an illusion. The mind, our powerful mind, has the ability to transform any situation. How can that be possible? Because what we interpret as reality is nothing more than the reflection of our perceptions. Two people can experience the exact same situation and yet experience it in completely different ways. It's not the environment that changes, it's the way we decide to see it. I remember a crucial moment in my life. I was walking down a busy street, surrounded by people, and suddenly I realized that even though my environment was chaotic, my peace didn't have to depend on it. What would happen if you decided that the external world doesn't have the power to alter your inner peace? In that instant, everything changed. The hustle and bustle continued, but inside me, something had gone quiet. It was there that I understood. That true power is not in controlling the environment, but in controlling how it affects us. How often do we let external chaos determine our internal state? We live surrounded by circumstances that seem to be beyond our control, but that doesn't mean we have to be slaves to them. The mind has the ability to create its own reality, regardless of what happens outside. How can you start to exercise that power? By observing your thoughts. When the environment challenges you, ask yourself, is this situation really defining me, or am I the one giving it that power? What I discovered on my journey was that the environment only has the power you give it. You can be in the middle of the storm and still find calm within you. You can be surrounded by challenges and still create opportunities. Is it easy? No, but it is possible. And that is the true power of the mind. Sometimes we believe that our happiness or success depends on what surrounds us, that we will only be happy when we change jobs, cities, or situations. But the truth is that those changes, although they can be helpful, are not the root of our peace. True transformation occurs when we realize that the environment does not define who we are. Who are you really when the external world collapses? There is the answer. The world will continue to change. Circumstances will continue to move. Like the wind, but your mind has the ability to remain firm, to create its own reality. And when you understand that, the environment stops being an obstacle and becomes a blank canvas, ready for you to paint it as you wish. Transforming the body from consciousness. I remember a time when I felt disconnected from my own body. It was as if my mind was in one place and my body in another. Have you ever felt that your body and mind are not in sync? It's a strange feeling, as if we are carrying a burden that doesn't belong to us. For years, I lived without realizing that this disconnection was a barrier that prevented me from experiencing the fullness of who I am. It was during a meditation, one silent afternoon, that I understood that my body was not just a passive vessel. It was not simply a set of bones and muscles that transported me through the world. My body was actually a physical reflection of my state of consciousness. Have you ever stopped to ask yourself what message your body is sending you right now? Every pain, every tension, every sensation is a sign of something deeper. That afternoon, as I breathed consciously, I began to feel every corner of my body in a different way. What if the body was not a barrier, but a door to a deeper state of connection with ourselves? It was then that I understood that I couldn't continue to ignore that part of me. If I wanted to transform completely, I needed to listen to what my body had to say. How can we transform our body from consciousness? It all begins with attention. Throughout my life, I had ignored the signals my body sent me. Sometimes something hurts, and we simply overlook it, or worse, we resist it. But the body, just like the mind, needs to be listened to. What would happen if you paid more attention to the signals your body sends you every day? In my process of change, I realized that every emotion I felt manifested itself in my body in some way. The tensions in my shoulders, the discomfort in my back, all of them were reflections of thoughts and emotions that I had not processed. How many times have we carried an emotional weight that turns into physical pain? It was at that moment that I understood that if I wanted to free my body, I first had to free my mind. I began to practice being present in my body, to feel every movement, every breath, as if it were a continuous dialogue between my mind and my body. Every time I felt tension, instead of ignoring it, I asked myself, what emotion is behind this? What thought am I feeding that is manifesting in my body? It was a slow process, but little by little, I began to notice changes. My body felt lighter, more alive, more connected to myself. Is it possible to transform the body simply by changing our consciousness? The answer is yes, and it has to do with more than just physical health. True transformation occurs when we are aware of what we carry within and how that affects our body. When we change our mind, our body responds. What thoughts and emotions are you carrying within that are manifesting physically in you? What impacted me most was realizing that I was not alone in this. At some point in our lives, we have all felt that disconnection between body and mind. But the good news is that we can restore that connection. The body is not an enemy, it is our ally on the journey toward fulfillment. We just have to listen to it. I began to notice how small changes in my way of thinking directly affected how I felt physically. What would happen if you changed your thoughts about yourself and about your body? You would start to feel different, not just mentally, but also physically. The body responds to the energy we send it from the mind. Time as an illusion. Live in the present. I have always had a complex relationship with time. For a long time, I lived trapped between yesterday and tomorrow, between what had already happened and what had yet to arrive. Has that ever happened to you? Do you find yourself reliving moments from the past or anticipating the future, but you realize that you are rarely truly present? That was my dilemma. I didn't know how to stay in the now. I remember one afternoon while walking on the beach, something inside me clicked. The waves came and went as they always do, but this time I felt them differently. I realized that in their movement, there was no past or future, only an eternal present. The sea doesn't worry about what has already happened or what is to come. Why do we? That thought stopped me in my tracks. How much of my life had passed without me truly living it? The reality is that we have become accustomed to living based on time, as if it were a force that controls us, as if we were always racing against the clock. But what if I told you that time is nothing more than an illusion? What is time really but a mental construct that keeps us out of the present? I realized that every time I worried about the future, I was giving my peace to something that did not yet exist. And every time I clung to the past, I was reliving moments that could no longer be changed. Why is it so hard for us to simply be? One of the most powerful things I learned is that the past and the future have no power over me unless I grant it to them. How many times have you been trapped in a painful memory or in anxiety about what has not yet happened? It's as if we live among shadows, forgetting that the real sun, the real brightness, is in the present. It was at that moment, as the salty wind hit my face, that I asked myself, what would happen if you decided that the now is all that matters? I tried it. I stopped worrying about the past that I couldn't change and about the future that had not yet arrived, and suddenly everything became clearer, lighter. The weight of the shoulds and coulds disappeared, and in their place, peace appeared. How can you start to live in the present? First, stop thinking about time as a race. The present is not a moment that passes quickly between the past and the future. It is all that exists. Every time you find yourself trapped in thoughts of yesterday or tomorrow, ask yourself, am I here now? And when you do, you will realize that the present has a richness that the past and future can never offer you. Living in the present doesn't mean ignoring what has been or stopping planning for what is to come. It means understanding that the only power that is truly yours is that of this moment. What would you do if you knew that this instant is the only thing you truly have? Life takes on a new dimension when you stop running towards something you cannot control and start savoring what you have in front of you. Time, as we understand it, is an illusion. We have become accustomed to measuring it, to dividing it, to controlling it. But the truth is that it does not belong to us. The only thing we can possess is this second, this breath, this opportunity to be present. And if you decided that this moment is perfect just as it is, you would realize that life is not in the past or in the future, but in every heartbeat you feel now. The alchemy of survival. From reaction to creation, there are moments in life when all we do is react. We react to situations, to the words of others, to what the world throws at us without warning. Has that ever happened to you? Do you feel like a leaf in the wind, moving from one side to another without control, simply responding to what life puts in front of you? I've been there too, living from survival. I remember a time when I felt constantly on the defensive, as if every day were a battle and all I had left was to resist. It was exhausting. Why do we feel we have to fight so hard? To survive? I asked myself many times. And then I understood something fundamental. I was living in reaction mode, and that did not allow me to create. We have been taught to survive, to act as if life were a constant challenge. But what if life is not just about reacting to what happens? What would happen if instead of just surviving, we started to create our reality? It was a revelation for me. Survival keeps us alive, but creation allows us to flourish. I began to observe my daily reactions to problems, to unforeseen events, to people. How many times a day do you react without even realizing it? We do it automatically without questioning whether that reaction is really necessary or if it is limiting us. There's the key. Every reaction anchors us to a pattern that repeats the same thing over and over again. And what I learned was that if I wanted to change my life, I had to change the way I responded. How do we move from reaction to creation? It all begins with a pause. Instead of reacting immediately, I took a moment to breathe, to observe the situation from another angle. And that pause although small, made all the difference. In that space, I could choose a different response, one that was not just instinctive, but conscious. It was in that instant that I began to transform my life. True alchemy happens when we decide that we no longer want to be a leaf in the wind. What would happen if instead of reacting to life, you started to create your own path? The power of creation is in each of us, but it requires a choice to let go of fear, to let go of the need to control everything, and to start building from a place of confidence and consciousness. I realized that surviving is only a small part of what we are capable of. It is the instinct that keeps us afloat, but it is not enough to take us further. What happens when we stop surviving and start creating? We begin to see opportunities where before there were only obstacles. We begin to design a life that feels aligned with who we really are, but creation is not a passive act. It requires you to observe yourself, to identify those moments in which you react out of habit and transform them into opportunities for creation. Have you noticed how many times a day you find yourself simply reacting? Each of those times is an opportunity to choose differently. The most surprising thing is that when you decide to create, your whole environment begins to change. The people around you, the situations you face, everything transforms because you are no longer reacting to chaos. You are creating harmony from within. And that is pure alchemy, converting what was once survival into something completely new, something full of possibilities, the three brains. The journey from thinking to being. I've always been fascinated by the idea that within us, we carry not just one but three brains. I'm not talking about three different organs, but about three ways of existing, three ways of processing life. Have you ever wondered how it's possible for the mind, heart, and gut to sometimes feel in conflict? For me, that disconnection was one of the biggest barriers I had to understand and, above all, overcome. I remember a moment in my life when I was immersed in constant thoughts. My mind would not stop racing, filling with worries, endless analyses, and questions that seemed to have no answer. My thinking brain had taken over me. Has that happened to you? You are in the middle of a storm of thoughts, and although it seems like you are thinking a lot, in reality, you are not solving anything. You are trapped. It was then that I discovered that the mind alone cannot take us where we want to go. The mind analyzes, plans, and worries, but it rarely allows you to be. How can we go from thinking to being? That was the question that accompanied me for a long time. And the answer, although complex, lies in understanding that we don't just think with our heads, we also think with our hearts and with our bodies. What I understood was that within us, we carry three types of brains that operate together but are sometimes in conflict. The thinking brain, which resides in the head, gives us the ability to analyze the world, to make logical decisions. But the second brain, the emotional brain, which lives in the heart, connects us with what we feel, with the emotions that guide us, with deep intuition. And finally, the instinctive brain, located in our gut, gives us that ability to act without thinking, to react from the deepest part of our being. What happens when these three brains are not aligned? What happened to me? I lived in my mind, disconnected from my heart and my gut. How many times have you felt that you think one thing but feel another and do something completely different? That is the fragmentation we live with without realizing it. And it is what keeps us trapped in a cycle of thoughts without getting to feel or act in an authentic way. The true journey begins when you start to align these three brains. When what you think, feel, and do is in harmony, your life changes. I remember the moment I managed to experience this. I was in a place surrounded by nature, breathing deeply, and suddenly everything felt in sync. My mind was clear. My heart was calm, and my body was relaxed but full of energy. How can you get to that harmony? The key is to listen to yourself, to not let only the mind have control. I began to practice coherence between these three centers of power. When I had to make a decision, I would ask myself, does this make sense in my head? Do I feel it in my heart? Does my body push me to do it? And when the three answers were affirmative, I knew I was aligned. Have you ever asked yourself if what you think is in sync with what you feel and with what you do? If it isn't, that's where the creative void, where everything is possible. There is a moment in life when we find ourselves facing what seems to be a void. That space where certainties vanish, where the known disappears, and we have no idea what will come next. Has that ever happened to you? That feeling of being on the edge of something new, but not knowing exactly what it is? For many, that void is terrifying, but for me, it was a revelation. I remember being in that void once, feeling as if everything I had known until then was falling apart. My plans had not been fulfilled, and the paths I had laid out were suddenly no longer there. What do you do when what you thought was solid disappears before your eyes? At first, I resisted. I wanted to cling to what I knew. I wanted answers, certainties, a way out. But I soon understood that this void was not an end, but a beginning. What if the void were not something to fear, but something to embrace? I realized that the void is not a place of loss, but a space full of possibilities. It is the 0 point, the place where everything can be created. How can you see the void not as an absence, but as a space full of potential? It was there, in that silence, in that apparent nothing, where I discovered that the greatest things arise when we let go of control, because in the void, everything is possible. What I learned is that the creative void is that space where we stop clinging to the past and the future. It is the place where we allow ourselves to simply be, without expectations, without rigid plans. Have you ever allowed yourself to be in the void without trying to fill it immediately? Sometimes we fill that void with thoughts, worries, or even unnecessary actions because we fear silence. But the void is where creation is born. For a long time, I thought that creating was an act of willpower, of effort, but what I discovered is that true creation is born in the void. What would you do if you allowed yourself to be in that space without fear, without haste? It is there that we can hear the voice of our essence, that voice that, in the midst of the daily noise, is suffocated. One afternoon, while I was sitting, alone in a park, contemplating a cloudless sky, I understood something fundamental. The void is the space where everything begins. It's like a blank page waiting for us to decide what we want to write on it. What would happen if instead of fearing the void, you saw it as an opportunity? Because in that space where everything seems uncertain, you have the power to decide what comes next. How can you start to create from the void? First, it is necessary to accept it. To accept that we don't always need to know what will come, that it's okay not to have all the answers, to accept that the void is not a sign of failure, but a door to the new. When I let go of the need to control everything, I began to see that the void was an invitation to let go of expectations, to open myself to the unexpected. The most beautiful thing about the creative void is that in it, the possibilities are infinite. You are not tied to what you have already done, or to what others expect of you. What would you do if you knew that in this moment, everything is possible? It is a question that changes the way you see life. Because in the void, you can recreate yourself, rediscover, and start over as many times as necessary. The void is actually the most fertile place of all. It is where life itself is reborn again and again. And the same thing happens with us. What new version of yourself is waiting to emerge from that void? Maybe you don't know yet, and that's okay. The void does not demand immediate answers. It only requires your presence, your openness, opening the doors of the future. I always thought that the future was something distant, something that was waiting in the distance, something that would arrive when the present ended. But there was a moment in my life when everything changed. I realized that the future is not a place that we must reach, but something that we build here and now. And it was through meditation that I understood that the doors to that future were already open. Have you ever stopped to think that the future is not as far away as we think? I remember the first time I really meditated. I'm not talking about closing my eyes and staying silent while my mind agitated uncontrollably. I'm talking about that time when I really immersed myself in the present, in that space without time, without past, without future. Have you ever felt that deep stillness, that connection with something bigger than you? It was at that moment that I understood that meditation is not just a practice to calm the mind. It is a key to opening the doors of what is to come. In the silence of meditation, I met my own creative power. What is it that we really want for our future? It's not about waiting for things to happen. It's about creating them from within. Meditation is that bridge between what we dream and what we can live. When you meditate, you not only connect with the present, but you also draw the map of your future, because in that space, you begin to consciously choose what you really want to experience. How can we open the doors of the future through meditation? The first thing I understood is that to open those doors, we need to be completely present. The present is the fertile ground where we plant the seeds of what is to come. Every time we sit in silence, every time we close our eyes and let the noise of the world dissipate, we are creating space for something new to flourish. During one of my deepest meditations, I felt how the limitations I had imposed on myself began to disappear. How many times have we believed that the future is out of our control? I realized that control is not external, but internal. What we sow in our minds through meditation is what we eventually reap in our reality. Meditation is not just a refuge to escape from the chaos of day-to-day life. It is a tool to redirect the course of our life. Every conscious breath is a declaration of intentions. Have you ever wondered what would happen if every thought during your meditation was aligned with what you really want? That's what I discovered. When you meditate with clarity, with purpose, you are opening yourself up to a future full of possibilities. I remember how, little by little, my meditations began to transform me. What I once saw as insoluble problems began to fade. I began to see things from a different perspective. The anxiety about tomorrow dissipated, and in its place, a certainty appeared. The future is not something that just happens. It is something that we can create consciously. How can you use meditation to open the doors of your future? It is simple but profound. Every time you meditate, imagine what you want to live, not from fear or need, but from love and gratitude. Allow yourself to visualize that future with all your senses. Feel what it would be like to live it. Breathe in that feeling and let it settle in you. It is not an act of control, it is an act of surrender. What would you do if you knew that at this very moment, you are creating the conditions for the future you desire? Meditation taught me that I don't need to wait for the future to arrive. I can call it to me. I can shape it. I can open those doors just by being present and connecting with the intention I carry in my heart. What future do you want to open? Today? The answer is not in time. It is in your ability to stop, to listen, to be. In that stillness, the doors open, and everything you have dreamed of begins to approach you. The transformation process. Steps to change your reality. I always thought that changing reality was something complicated, something that only happened if I was lucky or if the circumstances were favorable. But over time, I learned that transformation is not something that just happens. It is a process, a journey, and above all, a choice. Have you ever wanted to change your life but not known where to start? I've been there too. But what I discovered is that the steps to change our reality are within us, waiting to be activated. I remember the moment I decided that I didn't want to continue living the life I had. It wasn't that my life was bad, but I knew there was more. There was something inside me that asked for a transformation, something that needed to be expressed. Have you ever felt that way? As if a part of you knows you can be more, you can do more, but you don't know how to take the first step? I was exactly at that point, and then I understood that change does not come with a single blow, but step by step. The first step, and perhaps the most difficult, was to recognize that my reality was not a consequence of chance, but of my own thoughts, emotions, and actions. How many times have we believed that life happens to us instead of recognizing that we create it? That was a revealing moment. I realized that I had the power to transform. I remember sitting in silence with the most important question of all. What do I really want for my life? Not what others expect of me, not what seems safe or correct, but what my heart truly desired. That was the second step in my transformation. Process. Clarity. Are you clear about what you really want? Without that clarity, it's like trying to build a house without blueprints. Transformation begins when you decide what you truly want to create. The third step was action, because thoughts and emotions are powerful, but without action, they remain in the air. How many times have we dreamed of something but not done anything about it? I understood that if I wanted to change my reality, I had to act from that new place of awareness and clarity. But it was not about big actions, but about small steps every day. One more step toward the life I wanted. And in those small movements, I felt how my reality began to transform little by little. How can we maintain the change? That is the fourth step: consistency. It's not about making a gigantic change overnight, but about being consistent in the small daily changes, because every day is a new opportunity to choose again, to align yourself with what you really want to be and live. Transformation is a continuous process, not a final destination. What small steps can you start taking today toward the life you want? The most beautiful thing I discovered is that transformation is not a linear process. There will be moments of doubt. There will be days when you feel that nothing is changing. What do you do when it seems like change is not coming? You keep going, because true change happens within us first. And then, as a reflection, it manifests in the external world. Stop being the same. Breaking habits. To grow for a long time, I found myself trapped in a version of myself that I no longer recognized. I lived within a repetitive cycle, doing the same thing over and over again, expecting different results. Have you ever felt that way? As if you are stuck, as if the same routines, the same thoughts, and the same emotions are preventing you from moving forward? One day, I realized that if I wanted to change my life, I had to stop being the person I had always been. I remember the moment I understood it clearly. I was sitting at my desk, looking at a calendar that seemed to repeat endlessly. How can we expect a change if we continue to be the same? That question shook me deeply. It was as if suddenly everything I did daily was a barrier between the person I was and the person I wanted to be. It was there that I understood that to grow, I had to break the habits that kept me anchored. How can we break those habits that seem to define us? The first step was to realize that my habits were nothing more than repeated patterns created by my mind and my body on autopilot. My day-to-day was built on a foundation of actions and thoughts that no longer served me, and the curious thing is that those habits were not necessarily bad. They simply no longer reflected the person I was becoming. The most difficult thing was to accept that to stop being the same, I had to let go of the comfort of the known. Have you noticed how many of your habits are just a way to avoid change? What we fear most is not the effort of change, but the unknown that lies behind it. But what I discovered was that the discomfort of change is much less painful than the stagnation of remaining the same. The second step was to observe my patterns honestly. Every morning, every thought, every action was a clue to who I was being, and I began to question myself. Is this habit leading me toward the person I want to be, or is it keeping me in the version of myself that I no longer want? It was a profound exercise because I realized how many things I did out of inertia, without thinking if they were bringing me closer to my true potential. How can we start to break those habits? It all begins with small acts of consciousness. It is not necessary to make big changes overnight. What really transforms is the ability to stop in the moment and choose again. How many times a day do you act without thinking, simply because you have always done it that way? What I did was start to change one small habit at a time. If I always thought in a certain way in the face of a problem, I would stop and look at it from another perspective. If I always reacted the same way, to a challenge I would give myself the space to choose a different response. Over time, those small changes began to accumulate. Have you noticed that breaking a single habit can trigger a series of chain transformations? That's how growth works. You break a pattern, and suddenly the rest begins to fall apart because when you decide to stop being the same, everything around you also begins to change. What surprised me most was how much I thought I needed certain habits, when in reality, they were not serving me at all. It was a false sense of security. What habits are you carrying with you that deep down you know you should let go of but haven't? Because of fear of what will come next? The truth is that growth can only happen when you are willing to abandon what has kept you small, recognizing and accepting your true self. There was always a part of me that tried to fit in, that sought to meet the expectations of others, to be the version of me that I thought others wanted to see. Has that happened to you? You look in the mirror, and although you recognize the face, you feel that something doesn't fit, that what the world sees is not really who you are. That feeling of dissonance, of being disconnected from your true self, can become unbearable. Remember the day I realized that I was living a version of myself that did not belong to me. It was as if I had been wearing a mask, not because I wanted to, but because I got used to it. What happens when we pretend to be something we are not for so long? We lose the connection with our authentic self. We forget who we really are. And it was there that I knew I had to begin a deeper journey, the journey of recognizing and accepting my true self. What does it mean to accept who we really are? That was the first step for me, to accept that underneath all the layers I had built over the years, there was a pure essence, a truth that had been waiting to be recognized. But acceptance did not come overnight. There was resistance, fear, and above all, doubt. Who am I really if I let go of expectations, labels, and roles? That question accompanied me for a long time. What I discovered was that to recognize my true self, I first had to let go of the versions of myself that I had created to survive. They were not bad versions, but they were not complete either. How many times have we adopted an identity just to feel accepted, to feel safe? I realized that those identities were nothing more than temporary shelters, places where I hid when I didn't feel enough. But at the same time, those places limited my growth. How can we begin to recognize our true self? The first step is silence. It was in the moments of stillness, when I turned off the external noise, that I began to hear that internal voice that had been quiet for so long. That voice was none other than my true self. It was not in a hurry. It was not afraid. It simply existed in its purest form. Have you ever allowed yourself to sit in silence and listen to what you really have to say to yourself? I remember confronting my own shadows during that process, because although we want to find our light, we must also face what we have hidden. What parts of yourself have you rejected or avoided? That was one of the most difficult questions to answer. But I realized that by accepting both my light and my shadow, I began to see a more complete image of who I really am. Accepting my true self was not easy. Not because I didn't want to, but because it meant letting go of all the stories I had told myself over the years. The stories of limitation, of fear, of inadequacy. How many times have you believed that you are not enough because you don't fit into the molds that others have created for you? When I let go of those beliefs, I discovered a version of me that had been waiting in silence. That version was free. It was expansive. And above all, it was authentic. The last step was acceptance, because one thing is to recognize who you are, and another very different one is to accept it completely, with all your imperfections, with all your wounds. What happens when we accept our true self without judgment, without expectations? We free ourselves. And that liberation not only changes our relationship with ourselves, but also with the world. Because when you live from your authenticity, everything around you begins to align with that truth. The art of letting go, surrender, and transformation. I always thought that letting go was a sign of weakness, a way of surrendering to what we could not control. But over time, I learned that letting go is not an act of defeat, but of deep courage. Have you ever wondered what it really means to let go? For me, it was a long process, full of resistance. I felt that if I let go of what I thought I controlled, everything around me would fall apart. How many times do we cling to what no longer serves us for fear of what will happen if we let it go? I remember a key moment in my life when I was forced to let go of something I had held on to for years. It was a dream, an ideal that deep down no longer served me, but that had become part of my identity. What happens when what you love or what you have been ceases to be? I fought with all my might to keep it alive, but in the end, I understood that it was nothing more than a past version of myself that I could not continue to drag into the future. The day I decided to let it go, I felt a deep emptiness, but also a relief that I had not felt in a long time. How can we learn to let go? First, we must understand that letting go does not mean losing. We often think that by letting go of something, we are losing a part of ourselves, but in reality, what we are doing is creating space for something new. What could you gain if you allowed yourself to let go of what no longer serves you? I discovered that by letting go, I opened myself up to new opportunities that I could not see before because I was too busy clinging to the past. The second step was surrender. What does it really mean to surrender? For me, it was to stop fighting against the current of life. I always believed that I had to control every aspect of my existence, that I had to have a plan for everything. But when I realized that true power is in surrender, everything changed. To surrender is not to give up. It is to trust that life somehow knows where to take us. And in that act of trust, I realized that I was not losing control, but gaining freedom. What could you achieve if you surrendered to what life offers you instead of resisting it? It was a question I asked myself many times, and every time I found myself resisting something, whether it was a change, an emotion, or even a person, I would stop and ask myself, why am I fighting so hard? What would happen if I just let it go? What I discovered was that resistance only distances us from what we really need. Surrender, on the other hand, brings us closer to our true essence, to what is meant to be. How can we practice the art of letting go? It all begins with acceptance. Accepting that we cannot control everything, that there are things that must flow, and that holding on only causes us more suffering. It was at that moment that I realized that letting go was not an act of defeat, but of deep transformation. What transformation could happen in your life if you allowed yourself to let go of what weighs you down? The most powerful thing I experienced was realizing that by letting go, we not only free what no longer serves us, but we also free ourselves. Have you noticed how many times you have tied yourself to something that is no longer part of you? The act of letting go is an act of self-love, of respect for our growth, of recognition that we are not the same people we were yesterday, and that it is okay to let go of what no longer fits in our life. Rewriting your story. Redirecting your future. I always thought that my story was written, that the chapters of my life had already been laid out, and that all I had left was to follow the script. Have you ever felt as if you were living a story that no longer belongs to you? It's easy to fall into the trap of believing that we are prisoners of our past, of our decisions, or of the expectations that others have placed on us. But one day, I realized something powerful. My story is not over yet, and I can rewrite it whenever I decide. I remember the moment I realized that I was not condemned to repeat the same pattern, the same decisions, the same experiences. It was a quiet afternoon, and as I looked at the sky, I understood that just as the day constantly changes, I could also change my life. What happens when you decide that your past does not dictate your future? That was the moment I realized that I had the power to redirect my future, to write the chapters that had not yet been told. The first step was to accept that the story I had lived until now did not have to be my final destination. How many times have we thought that we cannot change who we are because we are already defined by what we have done? The truth is that every day is a new blank page waiting to be written. And what I learned was that to rewrite my story, I first had to free myself from the narrative that I had told myself for so long. What story have you told yourself that has kept you limited? That is the first question I asked myself. The second step was to start writing a new version of myself. But not from fear or guilt, but from possibility. What would happen if you decided that the future is completely open to you? I realized that every decision, every small change, was an opportunity to redirect my life toward a place that truly reflected who I am. It was not about erasing the past, but about integrating it, learning from it, but without letting it dictate my next steps. How can we start to rewrite our story? The first thing is to understand that we are not tied to our old beliefs or to the limitations that we have held as truths. Every time I faced a situation, I would ask myself, is this decision based on my old self or on the person I am choosing to be today? That was one of the keys to redirecting my future, because what we do today is what defines our tomorrow. I remember being afraid to leave behind parts of my old story. I thought that if I did, I would lose a part of my identity. Have you clung to a version of yourself just because it is what you know, even if it doesn't serve you? But what I discovered was that by letting go of those old narratives, I was not losing anything. I was gaining the opportunity to write a more authentic story, more aligned with who I really wanted to be. The third step was to act from that new version, because writing a new story is not just a mental exercise. It is an act of courage. How can you start to live as the person you want to be? Not tomorrow, but today. Every small action counts. Every time we choose something different from what we used to do, we are writing a new line in our story. And that, although it seems small, has immense power. What story do you want to tell in the future? That is the question that has accompanied me ever since, because I realized that although we cannot change what has already happened, we can choose how we want the rest to unfold. And that choice is what gives us the power to redirect our future. We are not trapped in a fixed narrative. We are the authors of our own life. And every day is an opportunity to write a new chapter. You asked me to translate your text into English. Here is the translation. Create a new mind. Imagine, feel, and live differently. Sometimes we believe our mind is fixed, that our thoughts and feelings are immutable, a solid structure that can't change. But one day I realized that the mind is like water. It can flow, it can change shape, it can transform if we allow it. Have you ever wondered what would happen if you could create a new mind, a new way of seeing and feeling the world? That thought was eye-opening for me. I had spent The second step was to feel it. not just to think differently, but to feel differently. I realized that our emotions are what truly guide our actions. How do you feel when you think about the life you desire? If you feel fear or doubt, you're likely getting trapped in the same old mind. But if you manage to feel joy, gratitude, and peace when you imagine that life, then you have already started to create something new. How can you feel differently? It all starts with gratitude. I began to practice it every day, not just for what I already had, but for what had not yet arrived. Have you ever allowed yourself to feel gratitude for what you are creating, even before it becomes part of your reality? When you do that, your mind begins to change. You stop thinking about what's missing and start living from the abundance of what's to come. The third step was to live differently, because there's no point in imagining and feeling something new if we don't act from that place. How can you start living as the person you want to be? Not tomorrow, but today. I began to make small decisions, each one aligned with the new mind I was creating. I stopped doing things that didn't resonate with the life I wanted. I stopped feeding thoughts that didn't serve me, and I started acting from that new place of possibility. Living your new reality. Be consistent with your creation. I remember the moment. I realized it wasn't just about imagining a new life, but about living it. Have you realized that you can dream of a different reality, but if you don't act in accordance with it, you'll keep living the same old story? That's what happened to me. I had spent a lot of time creating a new version of myself in my mind, but I hadn't taken the leap to align my actions with that vision. I realized that consistency is the key to making dreams a reality. What does it mean to be consistent with your creation? It means that every thought, every emotion, every action must be aligned with the life you want to live. You can't want a life of peace if your thoughts are filled with chaos. You can't desire abundance if you act from a fear of scarcity. I asked myself, am I living consistently with the life I'm trying to create? The answer wasn't always easy to accept, but it was necessary. The first step to living my new reality was to observe how I behaved day to day. How many times do we say we want something, but our actions lead us in the opposite direction? I realized that if I truly wanted that new life, I had to start living as if it were already here. I had to act like that person who had already achieved what they wanted. It was a subtle but powerful change. How can you start acting today as the person you want to be tomorrow? I remember a day when I was faced with a scary opportunity. My old mind told me I wasn't ready, that I didn't deserve that opportunity. But my new mind, the one I had worked so hard to create, pushed me to take the risk, to trust myself. What would you do if you truly lived as the person who already has everything they desire? That day, I decided to act from that new reality, and something wonderful happened. When my actions aligned with my vision, the external world began to respond differently. How can we be consistent with our creation? The first step is self-observation. Every time you face a decision, ask yourself, does this action reflect the life I want to live? If the answer is no, then you know something needs to change. Consistency isn't about being perfect, but about being conscious of every choice you make and ensuring those choices are in sync with the reality you want to create. The second step was to learn to let go of what wasn't aligned with my new life. Have you ever clung to people, situations, or thoughts that no longer fit the life you want? I did. I thought I needed to keep certain things out of loyalty to the past or fear of change. But what I discovered is that you can't live a new reality while still carrying the same old burdens. It's like trying to fly with a stone tied to your foot. What could you let go of today to fly toward the life you truly desire? The third step was to act with courage, because being consistent with your creation isn't always easy. It requires you to step out of your comfort zone, to make decisions that might scare you, but that bring you closer to the reality you've been dreaming of. How many times have you avoided taking a necessary step because fear stopped you? What I discovered is that fear is just a guardian at the door of transformation. If you walk through it, you'll find the life you've always wanted on the other side. What happens when you finally live consistently with what you've created? Everything begins to flow. There's no longer that dissonance between what you desire and what you do. Your mind, your heart, and your actions begin to move in the same direction, and the world responds to that alignment. What once seemed impossible becomes a part of your daily reality. The power of intention. The key to manifestation. I always heard that to achieve something in life, you had to work hard, plan every detail, and push yourself to the limit. But what I discovered on my own journey was that hard work isn't enough. There's something more subtle, more profound that propels us toward what we want. Intention. Have you ever wondered what role your intention plays in what you manifest in life? It was a question that changed the way I saw the world. I remember a particular moment when, despite all my efforts, I couldn't move forward. I felt stuck, as if there was an invisible barrier between what I wanted and what I could achieve. It was then that someone told me, the problem isn't what you do, it's where you do it from. That phrase stuck with me. Where do we do what we do from? That's the key, and the answer is intention. Intention isn't just a superficial desire, it's the energy that surrounds every action, thought, and decision we make. It's what determines whether what we seek will manifest or not. What would happen if instead of just focusing on what you want, you focused on the intention behind that desire? I discovered this when I started to observe my own life more closely. I realized that many times I wanted something, but my intention was contaminated by fear, doubt, or the need for control. The first step was to understand that pure intention comes from a place of trust, of faith that what you desire is possible and aligned with who you are. Where does your intention come from? I asked myself that question every time I wanted to manifest something. If the answer came from anxiety or desperation, I knew my intention wasn't aligned. But when the answer came from love, peace, and a deep certainty, everything began to flow. How can you start manifesting from a clear intention? First, you must ask yourself why you want what you want. It's not always easy, but it's necessary. I realized that some things I wanted came from the wrong place, from the need for external validation or from hidden fears. Have you noticed that sometimes we want something just because we think it will give us what we can't find within ourselves? The power of intention lies in being honest with yourself, in recognizing your true desires, and above all, in ensuring those desires are in sync with your essence. The second step was to learn to let go of controlling the how. Many times my intention was blocked because I was trying to control every detail of how it should manifest. How many times have you tried to force a situation because you don't trust the process? When I began to trust that life has a way of organizing itself at its own pace, my intention was freed. I understood that my job wasn't to control the path, but to keep my intention clear and firm, knowing that the how would come on its own. The third step was to act from that intention, because it's not enough to want something and expect the universe to bring it to you. How do you act when you know what you want is already on its way? That was a key change for me. I started living and acting as if I was already on the right path, as if what I wanted was already approaching me. And, in that act of faith, everything began to align. Opportunities appeared, doors opened, and what once seemed impossible became tangible. What would happen if you lived every day with a clear and firm intention? What I discovered is that intention not only attracts what you want, but transforms how you live the present. It gives you direction, purpose, and above all, it connects you to a force greater than yourself. Intention is the key to manifesting not only what you want, but what you truly need to grow and evolve. Energetic resonance. I remember one particular day, one of those days where everything seemed to go wrong. I was full of frustration and anxiety, and everything I did seemed to fail. Have you had days like that? Days where you feel like the universe is against you, where everything seems out of place? But that day, in the middle of my exhaustion, I stopped and asked myself, how am I feeling inside? Right there, in that moment, I realized something fundamental. My internal energy was attracting more of the same. What I carried within me was building my external experience. How can our internal energy attract our future? The first thing I understood is that everything we feel, think, and believe emits a vibration. This vibration isn't something we can see, but we can feel it. Have you noticed that when you are at peace, everything around you seems to align? The same thing happens with frustration, fear, or doubt. Life responds to us according to the energy we send out. The first step I took to change my reality was to work on my internal state. It wasn't just about changing what I thought, but about changing what I felt deeply. How do you feel inside when you think about the future you desire? I realized that the key wasn't in the goals or achievements, but in how my energy resonated with those visions of the future. If my internal state wasn't aligned with what I wanted, the future I desired would never arrive. I remember a very clear moment during meditation when I felt a deep change in my energy. It was as if something inside me was released. A tension I didn't know I was carrying. What would happen if you let go of that internal tension we carry without realizing it? When I released it, my energy began to vibrate differently, and everything around me started to change. The people who came into my life, the opportunities, everything resonated with that new state of peace and clarity. How can you start working on your energetic resonance? The first step is awareness. Every time you face a challenge, ask yourself, how am I internally resonating with this situation? Because what you attract isn't so much what you do, but who you are inside. If your energy is filled with fear, you will attract more reasons to feel scared. But if your energy is filled with confidence and gratitude, your life will begin to respond to that frequency. The second step was to practice coherence between my mind, heart, and body, because it's not enough to think positively if your heart is full of doubt inside. Have you ever found yourself saying everything will be okay, while deep down you don't feel that way? That's energetic dissonance. I learned that to attract what I wanted, I had to align what I thought, what I felt, and how I acted. Only when those three were in sync did my energetic resonance become powerful and effective. The third step was to trust, because energetic resonance isn't just about emitting a good vibration and expecting everything to fall from the sky. How can you trust that the universe will return what you emit? That trust is built when you see how, little by little, your life begins to align with what you feel inside. The key is to maintain that resonance even when things don't go as you expect, knowing that the energy you emit always finds its way back to you. The science of being. Understanding your quantum self, I always believed that being was defined by the limits of what I could see and touch. I thought that what we call I was a sum of experiences, memories, body, and thoughts. But one day I realized that we are much more than that. Have you ever wondered if there's more to you than what you perceive at first glance? What I discovered was that we are not just physical beings, but we also exist in a quantum reality where everything we are and can be is connected in an infinite web of possibilities. I remember when I started to delve into the idea of the quantum self, that concept that says we exist in multiple realities at the same time, that our decisions aren't straight lines but points in a vast field of energy and potential. What does it mean to be more than the body we inhabit? That question changed the way I understood myself. I realized that the self isn't limited by time or space. We are an expression of quantum energy, a field of possibilities. How can we understand our quantum self? First, we must leave behind the idea that we are separate from what surrounds us. Quantum science tells us that everything is connected. that what you think, feel, and do doesn't just affect your life, but the universe around you. Have you noticed that every thought has an impact beyond your own mind? I discovered it when I began to notice that my emotions and thoughts resonated with what was happening around me. It wasn't a coincidence. It was the science of being manifesting. How would you connect with that version of yourself that lives beyond the limits of what you know? What I understood is that we are not fixed in a single version of ourselves. In this instant, infinite versions of what we can be exist, waiting to be chosen. The quantum self is the door to those possibilities. It doesn't matter who you've been, until now. You are not trapped in a single timeline. You can change, you can transform, because within you there exists an infinite field of choices. What does it really mean to live from that quantum self? I started to notice that the decisions I made from consciousness, those that were aligned with my intuition and my heart, led me toward a version of myself that I didn't even know existed. Have you ever wondered what version of yourself is, waiting to be activated? Because every choice we make places us in a new reality, in a new version of our life. What we call destiny is nothing more than a series of quantum choices, moments in which we decide what part of ourselves we want to bring into the present. I remember a time when I felt stuck, as if I couldn't move forward. I thought my life was stalled in one direction. But in a moment of deep introspection, I realized that I had been choosing the same version of myself over and over, based on old beliefs, fears, and patterns that no longer served me. How would you transform if you consciously chose a new version of yourself? It was then that I understood that everything I desired was already inside me, in some quantum place, waiting for me to bring it into this reality. How can we access our quantum self? The first step is awareness of our choices. Every thought, every emotion is a door to a new possibility. What you think of yourself in this moment is creating a quantum reality. If you see yourself as limited, you will attract that limitation. But if you see yourself as an unlimited being, open to infinite possibilities, then you will begin to attract a reality in line with that vision. The second step is clear intention, because in the quantum field, what matters isn't just what you want, but the clarity with which you visualize it. Have you ever allowed yourself to imagine yourself as a higher, freer version, more connected to the universe? That's the key to activating your quantum self, seeing it, feeling it, and living as if you already exist in that reality. The magic of change, transforming from the inside out. I always heard that change came from the outside, that circumstances had to improve, that people around us had to change, that the world had to adapt for us to be different. But over time, I learned something profound. True change, the kind that radically transforms your life, begins within. Have you ever felt that even if you change everything around you, you're still stuck in the same place? That's how I felt for a long time, until I understood that the magic of change isn't in what's external, but in what happens inside of us. I remember one particular day, one of those days where I felt overwhelmed by everything. I looked everywhere, to people, my surroundings, opportunities that weren't coming. But nothing seemed to change. How is it possible that we look so much outside without finding answers? It was in that moment, in the midst of the confusion, that the first step in this transformation was acceptance. Accepting that I couldn't control the external, but I could change my relationship with it. How many times do we try to control what's not in our hands? I realized that control wasn't the answer. Acceptance was. Accepting my emotions, accepting my fears, accepting that change wouldn't come from the outside, but first had to be born within me. It was a moment of humility, but also of liberation. The second step was to look deep inside and ask the question, what part of me needs to be transformed so that my external life aligns with what I truly desire? It was an uncomfortable question, because it meant confronting parts of myself that I had ignored for a long time. What parts of yourself have you avoided facing? I realized that the resistance to change came from my own fears, from beliefs that limited me, from emotional patterns I had carried for years. How can you transform from within? The key is to observe your thoughts, your emotions, and your reactions, and ask yourself, is this aligned with the life I want to live? Because change isn't about changing everything at once, but about starting to align who you are with what you want to see manifested externally. And that starts with the small moments, with the daily decisions. What would you do today if you were already the person you want to be? That's the magic of change from within. When you act as if you are already living that new reality, everything else begins to align. I remember that as I began to transform my interior, my external world also started to change. It wasn't immediate, but it was constant. Have you noticed that when you change your perspective, the world seems to respond differently? What I used to see as unmovable problems began to feel lighter, easier to handle. And the most beautiful thing was that the people and opportunities that once seemed distant began to approach. Not because the world had changed, but because my internal vibration had changed. The final step was surrender, because true change comes not just from action, but from trust. How can you trust that by changing from within, the universe will respond? What I learned is that internal change is the seed we plant, but trust is the water that makes it grow. And when you trust that what you are transforming within you will flourish in the external world, then that magic becomes real. The legacy of your new reality. Live and share your evolution. There's a moment in the journey of transformation where you realize something powerful. Your evolution isn't just for you. Have you ever felt that by changing, you impact not only your life, but also the lives of those around you? That was one of the deepest lessons I experienced. I realized that everything we create, everything we are, leaves a legacy. And that legacy is what we share with the world, even without saying a word. I remember the moment everything changed for me. I had worked so hard on my personal growth, on transforming my reality, that I felt at peace, in balance. But then I asked myself, and now what? What do I do with everything I've learned? It was then that I understood that the next step in evolution isn't just to live that new reality, but to share it, because every individual transformation has the power to inspire, to touch others, to leave a mark. What does it mean to leave a legacy of your evolution? It's not about grand gestures or radically changing the world, but about being true to that new version of yourself. It's living every day from that authenticity you've cultivated and, in the process, allowing others to see what's possible. You noticed how your evolution has an effect on those around you, even when you don't realize it? I discovered it when, without my noticing, people close to me started asking questions, also changing their ways of thinking, not because I told them to, but because they saw something different in me. The first step to living and sharing your evolution is to accept that your change is already a gift. And now, as you reach this moment, I invite you to look forward with open eyes and a heart full of gratitude. You have done the most difficult thing. You have awakened to your own power. What comes next is to live from that place. You don't need more answers. You don't need more validation. Everything you were looking for is inside you. The confidence, the peace, the strength are already within you, waiting to be manifested in every step you take. Your life is your legacy. Every smile you share, every hand you offer, every word you inspire in others is a part of that legacy. And by living from your truth, by sharing your evolution with the world, you become a beacon for those who are also looking for their way. Never underestimate the impact your life can have, because what you have achieved is not just for you. It's a light that you can now share, and that light has the power to illuminate the path of others. The journey to yourself doesn't end here. This is just the beginning of a new stage. Live with purpose, live with love, and above all, live with the certainty that everything you need to create a fulfilling life is already within you. You have rewritten your story, you have transformed your reality, and now the next chapter is ready to be written by you, with all that you are and all that you have learned. Never forget. You are more powerful than you can imagine, and your life is a continuous expression of that strength you carry within. So keep going. Live from the heart, create from your essence, and share the light you have discovered on this journey. The world needs your evolution, your authenticity, and the legacy that only you can leave. This is your moment. Make it shine. If this audiobook has inspired you, imagine what you can discover with many more. Don't let knowledge and spiritual growth end here. Explore our full playlist and immerse yourself in more transformative wisdom. And if you truly want to elevate your life with different points of view on spirituality, I invite you to visit my channel, Loiza Martinez, where you will find in-depth spiritual content to continue expanding your mind and your being. Don't miss the opportunity to continue transforming your reality. Take the next step now. Thank you very much. And now, as you reach this moment, I invite you to look forward with open eyes and a heart full of gratitude. You have done the most difficult thing. You have awakened to your own power. What comes next is to live from that place. You don't need more answers. You don't need more validation. Everything you were looking for is inside you. The confidence, the peace, the strength are already within you, waiting to be manifested in every step you take. Your life is your legacy. Every smile you share, every hand you offer, every word you inspire in others is a part of that legacy. And by living from your truth, by sharing your evolution with the world, you become a beacon for those who are also looking for their way. Never underestimate the impact your life can have, because what you have achieved is not just for you. It's a light that you can now share, and that light has the power to illuminate the path of others. The journey to yourself doesn't end here. This is just the beginning of a new stage. Live with purpose, live with love, and above all, live with the certainty that everything you need to create a fulfilling life is already within you. You have rewritten your story, you have transformed your reality, and now the next chapter is ready to be written by you, with all that you are and all that you have learned. Never forget. You are more powerful than you can imagine, and your life is a continuous expression of that strength you carry within. So keep going. Live from the heart, create from your essence, and share the light you have discovered on this journey. The world needs your evolution, your authenticity, and the legacy that only you can leave. This is your moment. Make it shine. If this audiobook has inspired you, imagine what you can discover with many more. Don't let knowledge and spiritual growth end here. Explore our full playlist and immerse yourself in more transformative wisdom. And if you truly want to elevate your life with different points of view on spirituality, I invite you to visit my channel, Loiza Martinez, where you will find in-depth spiritual content to continue expanding your mind and your being. Don't miss the opportunity to continue transforming your reality. Take the next step now. Thank you very much.